straight upward, right? Air rushing. Void rotation tightens and produces a column of swirling fire and smoke. These fire whirls, as they're called, are often short-lived and usually less than 50 feet across. But under certain conditions, large fires, like this one, can generate pyrocumulus thunderstorms that can produce large, long-lasting firenados. They can be hundreds of feet across and thousands of feet tall. Look at the size of that thing. Could you imagine the power? They combine the intensity of the raging fire with the destructive power of a tornado. Winds over 140 miles an hour leave a trail of destruction and create extremely hazardous conditions for firefighters. Unfortunately, this terrifying display might be showing up more often as warming temperatures and drying conditions become more prevalent across the western United States.
Scary stuff for sure. Hey, still to come here on Weather Underground, our coverage of Hurricane Delta continues as this powerful storm closes in on the U.S. Gulf Coast. We're going to take you back to the areas that are in the bullseye for this hurricane. Plus, where we could see significant inland impacts even after the landfall occurs. We'll take you to the areas that are at risk for flooding and wind damage. That's when Weather Underground comes back. Also following storms for you across the Northeast tonight with wind gusts as high as 70 miles an hour in Massachusetts.
Welcome back into Weather Underground. I mentioned the storms across the Northeast. I want to take you there. We now have 250,000 customers without power thanks to a very strong line of thunderstorms offering up big winds. And these are moving into some of those populated cities across New England, including the Boston area. It's knocking on your doorstep. Middlesex, Norfolk, and Worcester counties under this severe thunderstorm warning. And you can see how it's taken on that backward C shape. That's indicative of that push of very strong winds. We could see gusts over 70 miles an hour. We have with this line, and that's going to be a threat. We continue to monitor severe warnings all the way from sections of New Hampshire down into Connecticut, even parts of New York State under those warnings. So a continuous line of warnings thanks to the strong gusty winds that are going to accompany these storms. And you can see the trail of this line of storms. Down trees galore. Numerous reports of power outages as well in East Greenbush. Trees down all throughout the area. In Syracuse, tree snapped in half with wires down. So that's the issue. I would anticipate those power outage numbers to go up before they go down. Here in New York State, Albany, around the Capital District, that's where we've got over 62,000 customers without power. Now we're going to be watching parts of Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, still New York, Mike, maybe even in parts of New Hampshire. It's a potent thunderstorm complex making its way through the region.
We'll keep an eye on that here this evening for sure. Alex, thank you. And return to our top story. It's Hurricane Delta. Category 1 hurricanes had a lot of interaction with land today across the Yucatan Peninsula. Also some pretty strong wind shear coming in from the southeast. We call it moderate wind shear coming in from the southeast. That's allowed this hurricane to weaken pretty significantly from its max winds yesterday evening at 145, now down to 85 miles per hour. Northwest movement at 17, and the location now 55 miles outside of Progreso, Mexico here. So we're now going to start to see this thing work its way back out over the Gulf of Mexico, get away from land here, reduce the friction here, and go into a slower intensification phase. The thing really ramped up yesterday. It'll be an intensification again, but a slower one at this point. And we do think it goes back up to a Category 3. But then by the time we get to landfall, likely weakening a little bit to a Category 2, but still a very significant threat here to Louisiana. And we're going to get surge issues here, even outside of that cone area. The effects can go well beyond the cone. That's just the most likely center point for the hurricane is within that cone. Not a lot of dry air out there. The dry air is shown in orange on the map, and we're kind of sandwiched in between two areas. So we've got a moist atmosphere to work with. We're going into a lower wind shear environment. We're going into warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico and some weak upper level ridging in place. All those things working in favor of intensification. Not going to happen, at the drop of a hat, that's for sure. But some nighttime convection will likely happen near the center. It'll congeal once again. We've never seen an eye with this thing. We've never been able to see it on the satellite at all, even though it was present. We'll see if that happens now as it now starts to come out over the Atlantic or the Gulf of Mexico over the next 2 days. Tropical storm force winds extend out about 125 miles from the center. That wind field expands all the way through landfall, where it then could become 160 miles from the center. So a lot of places will get wind from this, Alex, but I will say this. The core of hurricane force winds is pretty tiny right now, and we're hoping, at least with the forecast, it stays that way. That's a relatively small core.
Yeah, that would be a small victory, right, in the overall forecast. Then we've got the rain to deal with, and this is something that's a coastal issue, but it also includes communities well inland. Tomorrow and into early Friday, plenty of areas where we'll be watching for the threat of flash flooding. We're talking the state line really between extreme East Texas and Louisiana, all through Louisiana, all into Mississippi, at least the southern, third of Mississippi, and then portions of southern Alabama and extreme western Florida. These are communities that could get enough rain to trigger some flash flooding issues. Friday and into early Saturday, likelihood goes up, especially around and south of Lake Charles. That's where we think the biggest concentration of the heavy rain will be. Up into parts of Arkansas, western Mississippi, though, threat of flash flooding will be with us into the start of the weekend. And when we look at our forecast rainfall totals, here's one positive. Flash flooding is a potential, but this storm is going to move. It's not going to just sit there along the coast and dump feet of rain. So our highest totals will likely be in that 8 to 12 inch range. And then you can see that stretch of 5 to 8 inches getting up towards Memphis. That's according to the European model. GFS model a little farther east with some of that heaviest rainfall through parts of southern Louisiana. This would be mainly, say, Lake Charles over towards Lafayette area, and then western parts of Mississippi getting in on some of those 5 to 8 inch totals. Mike?
All right, Alex, thank you. And coming up on Weather Underground, we're breaking down the future track of Hurricane Delta and where the latest models are zeroing in for a landfall location. Plus, a look where hurricane hunters are flying and where they are tonight, what they're finding as Delta threatens to intensify once again. All the details about this ominous hurricane likely to make landfall in the next 2 days in Louisiana. Stick around. Weather Underground will be right back.
Next on Weather Underground, Hurricane Delta now entering the Gulf of Mexico and closing in on the U.S. coast. Hurricane storm surge watches issued for portions of the Texas and Louisiana coastline, including many of the same areas that were ravaged by Hurricane Laura back in late August. We've got live team coverage for you.
And Delta battering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula overnight. The storm making landfall with 105-mile-per winds, knocked out power, slamming the resort areas of Cancun and Cozumel with dangerous storm surge. And tonight, hurricane hunter missions ongoing as this hurricane threatens to intensify once again. We have in-depth analysis of Delta's future track and every scenario for landfall and then beyond. It's coming your way next on a special edition of Weather Underground. Hi everyone, thanks for staying with us tonight for Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. We are covering every angle of Hurricane Delta to help you get ready. If you got any questions, and I'm sure you do, don't forget you can send them to us on Twitter. Use the hashtag Hurricane Questions. There's a lot of complicated stuff going on with this one, Mike, so we're going to break it down for people. This did make landfall in Mexico. Now Hurricane Delta begins the process of reorganizing and gaining strength here over the Gulf. Mike, down to a Category 1, but we do anticipate that it will re-intensify.
Yeah, I mean, it's just a little bit of a head fake right now. This wasn't anything we didn't anticipate. Maybe the degree to how much it went down, we didn't exactly expect, but still, now that we're getting out away from the Yucatan Peninsula, we'll have less interaction with land over the course of the next 24 hours. We're going to see this thing come back to life here. Northwest movement at 17 here. Pressures come up to 977. and we're going to watch it drift its way here to the northwest a little bit more, then eventually take a track more to the north here. So we'll show you that forecast cone. Not a lot has changed with it over the last 24 hours. It's basically locked in at this point, but we do anticipate going back up to tomorrow night or Friday morning, a Category 3 hurricane. So it's going to go right back up again, folks, and then that's going to gin up a decent amount of storm surge, and we're going to go into a storm surge prone coastline here, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama. Hurricane watches, in fact, here will include Port Arthur and Beaumont, Texas, through coastal Louisiana here, but also Lake Charles, Lafayette, Morgan City. These are all places where hurricane force winds could come your way. On the satellite, we're going to start to see, I think, more of a blow-up of convection around the center overnight tonight. A lot of times we'll get these nocturnal storms that pop up here, and I think you'll start to see a little bit more of that and some reorganization of an eye here. And so tomorrow morning, I think we're going to have a more intense hurricane than what we have now. As far as the dry air, we've been fending that off at a pretty good clip here. We've got dry air here, and we've got dry air here. Both those pockets of dry air are a good bit away from the hurricane, so that's not been getting into the hurricane and choking it off at all. So we've got a decent amount of moisture around it. We're going to have warm sea surface temperatures, a lower wind shear environment, all these things favorable for more formation here. Hurricane hunters have been going out and flying around the storm. We've got a low-level invest that's in there right now, and we're going to get an upper-level invest that they already took off from Lakeland. So that flight will give us more indication what the atmosphere around the hurricane is doing, Alex, and that data put into the hurricane models. But those hurricane models have really not moved at all. I mean, they are locked in here the last 24 hours. Yeah, so we're going to be watching this. We want you, though, to prepare here moving forward. Here's what we know. Let's get you caught up. States of emergency have been declared in Mississippi, in Alabama, and in the state of Louisiana. Now, there in Louisiana, mandatory evacuations are in place in Cameron and in Vermilion Parish. The president was briefed today on Hurricane Delta. He's asking Gulf Coast residents to pay close attention to what their local and state officials are asking them to do. The Missouri LSU game will move to Columbia, Missouri to get out of Delta's path. And I'm also learning that Lafayette, the game there between the Ragin' Cajuns, that has also been postponed, actually, that one for Wednesday. Want to check in now with meteorologist Paul Goodloe live for us this evening in New Orleans. Paul, you know when they're moving football around, they know it's serious, but this is just one after another this year with storms here in Louisiana.
Yeah, you mentioned the football game, but it was supposed to be an evening game, but they moved it to, I think, a noon start up in Columbia, Missouri to get out of harm's way, and hopefully people can perhaps watch that from a safe place. But now's the time to prepare your safe place. Here in New Orleans, like you mentioned, Alex, this is now the sixth hurricane that we've been in the cone for from the National Hurricane Center. We're no longer in that cone, but we're still under a tropical storm watch. The fifth time so far just this season we've been under a tropical storm watch, meaning we're expecting tropical storm conditions within 48 hours. So basically, really starting tomorrow, we're going to start dealing with these winds increasing. Right now, 5 to 10 miles per hour actually feels great because the temperatures today got into the upper 80s with our dew points, measure of moisture in the air in the low 70s. That's tropical air. That's why this hurricane is coming this way. Also, the big ridge of high pressure is also helping this thing come this way as well. But, you know, it's basically now through sunset tomorrow is the time you really want to rush your preparations. We do think wind will be the biggest issue. As we head on towards perhaps this time on Friday, we could be dealing with 50, 60 plus mile per hour wind gusts, and that's going to do some damage. The rain, hopefully it's that 1 to 2 range in terms of 1 to 2 inches of rain, not feet, 1 to 2 inches. It could get to that 3 to 4 inches of rain as well. That could cause some problems depending on how fast it falls here in the city. Remember, they can only handle for the first hour about an inch of rain, and then after that, a half inch for every hour after that. So the pumping systems can easily be overwhelmed by a passing and slow-moving summer thunderstorm, let alone an approaching hurricane or tropical storm. So that we do have our vulnerabilities here in New Orleans, but we're hoping the most intense impacts will be west of here. But that also doesn't mean it's a good story for areas west of Louisiana. Once again, Baton Rouge, even Lafayette, we could be dealing with a landfalling hurricane maybe less than 2 days from right now. Alex?
All right, Paul, thank you so much. I want to take a little time out here from Delta, get you up into the Northeast where we've got big storms moving into places like Boston. Right now, Boston, you are seeing the worst of it at this point, now beginning to make its way to the east side. Boston Logan gusted at 65 miles an hour, so giving you a sense of just how strong these storms are, at least the winds the storms are producing. There's your severe thunderstorm warning. So again, now the east side of Boston now really beginning to move out over the water, but southeast Quincy, you're still, Quincy, you're getting just hammered right now as those strong winds begin to move in. We get you down towards areas between Walpole and Brockton. You're going to be seeing some of the worst of the weather. Plenty of downed trees from parts of New York State all the way into the New England states have been an issue, and we've got a lot of people without power. Portions of Rhode Island getting into the state of Connecticut. Here we've got warnings, including Providence. Those storms, again, on your doorstep just to the northwest. So you're looking that direction. It looks dark. You know it's headed your way. Look at the path, the footprint of reports. All the way from Lake Ontario over to the East Coast. Plenty of downed trees and strong wind gust reports, Mike. 60, 70+ mile per hour reports coming in.
Really rough weather for us in the Northeast. Alex, thanks for that update. And I'll get you back to Delta and show you the atmosphere it's going into right now. And I know you're all wondering, okay, well, where's it headed? How strong is it going to be? Ultimately, that's what you want to know, right? I know this is a complicated looking map, but I'm going to try to break it down for you and make it as simple as possible. What's steering it? What's pushing it along? What's pulling it? How do we know where it's going? Ultimately, at this point, it's under the influence of this Bermuda high that shifted back over toward the peninsula of Florida. And really, with the clockwise flow around that, it's been able to shove the hurricane off to the west, all right? But that high pressure area is going to break down just a little bit, weaken slightly, and it might shift back to the more traditional location back toward Bermuda. That will allow the hurricane, we think, to maybe start to take more of a northerly turn there, and then after that, maybe a northeast turn. All right, so high pressure steers the hurricane, and then watch what happens as it gets out into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, okay? We're going to get an area here just to the north of it that starts to influence it, including a jet stream dip here. So you're going to get this upper level trough that digs in here, and as that happens, now the hurricane doesn't likely just go right into it. It flows more along the upper and mid-level flow of the atmosphere. So it follows that in essence. So it gets picked up, pulled more to the northeast, and that certainly is in effect once it comes more inland. That's a look at what the forecast track is. And so all those big atmospheric players are what influences the hurricane's track here. That's the forecast cone with Louisiana squarely in the middle of it. US GFS, Global Forecast Systems model, literally goes right down the center of the hurricane cone here, and all the GFS ensemble members, all the different runs they do of it, they're all within the cone here. And the GFS actually has been a pretty solid performer this year when it comes to location. The other computer models, again, almost all of them, solidly within that cone, so they have a good handle. What that tells you is they have a good handle on what the atmospheric steering currents are like right now. And the European ensemble models also taking it mostly into Louisiana. And after that, there's some divergence. Obviously, Alex, is farther off in time here, but I'd say southern Mississippi, River Valley here, also the Mid-South, also the Ohio Valley could all be in play here with this hurricane.
Yeah, we got a lot of real estate to keep an eye on. New video coming out of Grand Isle, Louisiana. They are sandbagging. Preparations, they get the bags ready, they distribute them, and then people take them home and or to their businesses to set up as needed. This has been done before the storms, for the storms before this season, being done once again here for Hurricane Delta. Those are some heavy-duty sandbags, right? Storm surge also on the table for Hurricane Delta, and could be some of the same hard-hit areas. You know, some of these communities, they still haven't returned after Hurricane Laura, and so they're maybe under evacuation order, but there's really nobody to evacuate. We look at the alerts, storm surge watches, all the way from extreme eastern Texas over into portions of southern Alabama. So we've got Mobile, Gulfport, Grand Isle, all the way to Cameron, and again, extreme southeastern portions of Texas under those alerts. Here is our potential. So we've highlighted the possibility. Doesn't mean everybody in this zone will get 7 to 11 feet of storm surge, but someone in that zone could see storm surge value values that high. So once again, we're looking at that extremely dangerous, life-threatening storm surge across parts of the south central, southeastern Louisiana coastline. This is a part of the coast that is extremely surge prone because of that shallow shelf. You know, we look at the east coast of, say, Florida, much steeper shelf. So we don't have as much of a surge problem as we see all the way from Florida and into the Gulf of Mexico. So those Gulf of Mexico areas are extremely, extremely prone to the surge. Larger storms also, which we anticipate this will become, they produce a higher surge because wind pushes on a larger area of the ocean, and the stronger wind affects an area for a longer period of time. So, Mike, don't think, oh, it's slightly weaker, that's a good thing. If it's slightly weaker but much larger, we can see similar impacts.
Yeah, and maybe even worse in some instances. Yeah, Alex, thanks for that. All right, to Grand Isle, Louisiana we go. That's a live look right now. And there are always, you know, when you get down here into the marshy area, there are a lot of man-made roads that are built in here that, you know, are in places that are very vulnerable, right? And so this could be a roadway, and anywhere truly around Grand Isle could be at risk for some rainfall and surge flooding. When do we expect the serious winds to start to approach? That could be as early as Friday morning when tropical storm force winds come in, and then throughout the day the winds only get gradually bigger and bigger and higher. Tropical storm force winds currently extend out about 125 miles from the center, and that could expand over the course of time here. The core of the hurricane force winds stays pretty steady. It doesn't expand dramatically at all, and so at this point that's a good thing, where this core right here would be the area where you'd see 74+ mile per hour winds. Now as the storm gets closer and closer, again you're going to look at a landfall maybe somewhere between Cameron, Louisiana, and Pecan Island here. It'd be about right through there would be the goalpost for you. You're going to have the strongest winds in that core, but you could still have tropical storm force winds even out here around New Orleans. You could have tropical storm force winds over here in Houston, Galveston, and in Beaumont as well. You could even have tropical storm force winds that go well inland another day or two after a landfall. Right now our winds are light. Wouldn't expect much happening right now. The hurricane's literally really hundreds and hundreds of miles away at this point. Easterly winds start to pick up as we go through the afternoon and evening tomorrow. Then they really start to ramp up going into Friday as the hurricane approaches. Here we go now, Houma. We've got a tropical storm force wind, same in Lake Charles and Port Arthur, and it only gets worse as we go through the day on Friday when the really intense stuff comes in, especially, Alex, right front quadrant at landfall.
Absolutely. I've got to talk about the rain side of the story, too, because this is one that doesn't just affect portions of the coast. We see that stretch well inland, and we could be looking at some big totals. Positive with this one is we're not going to be measuring the rainfall in feet in most spots, because this storm is going to move. So we're not looking at a storm that just meanders near the coast and dumps 20, 30 inches. That is not this storm. So there's a positive. With that said, still the possibility of some flash flooding, because you can see, according to the European model, actually, let me make this white, portions of southwest, south central Louisiana could get 8 to 12 inches of rain. That would obviously be too much in a short period of time and could lead to some flooding. GFS model shifts that a little farther to the east, so it'd be more of a Lafayette area, getting close to Lake Charles, that sees some of the higher totals, and then also brings a heavier stretch back into western parts of Mississippi. So we'll be watching these communities for the possibility for some flash flooding. But again, 5 to 8 inches in the forecast, much better than what we saw out of previous storms. You know, we were talking 10, 20, 30 inches of rainfall. Look at the European model. As this storm moves in tomorrow afternoon, we'll begin to see the rain along sections of the Gulf Coast really begin to pick up into Friday morning and through the afternoon as the system makes landfall. And then that heaviest area of rain by Saturday morning, midday, makes its way into parts of the Mississippi Valley. I think by later in the day, less in the way of heavy rainfall zones, but still some pockets of big downpours across portions of Kentucky, Tennessee, and Alabama. Mike?
Want to get you back to the Northeast. We've got a very significant thunderstorm squall line that's knocked down power to roughly 250,000 customers, hammering us in Hartford, Providence, Norwich, and up toward Boston as well. 66+ mile per hour wind gusts reported here. Essex and Middlesex counties under severe thunderstorm warnings, and we're back after this.
A woman.
It's almost unbelievable this is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel. hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Guthrie live in New Orleans on the banks of the mighty Mississippi, the Big Muddy here. And if you look out that way, you're looking east, and that's the direction that will dominate our wind here over the next probably 36 to 48 hours as we're waiting the approach of Hurricane Delta. The good news is New Orleans is no longer in that cone, that forecast cone in terms of where the area could be, but we're still close enough. We're definitely going to have some impacts here. Rain, perhaps almost constantly battering this area. Prepare for power outages and maybe losing your power for maybe a day or two. So make sure if you have generators, use them safely outside. Make sure you have gas nearby. But if you are going to prepare, if you're in this area, you got about 24 hours before our weather conditions. This will not make it safe to be outside as we have the approach of yet another hurricane on the U.S. coastline. And at least here in New Orleans, this is now the 5th time we've been under a tropical storm watch. We cannot wait until the end of this year for sure. Alex?
Absolutely. A lot of people are very much on the we're done boat. Well, this is what Delta looked like as it neared land this morning. Playa del Carmen in Mexico, the site of this video. You can just hear the wind, right? Made landfall in the Yucatan Peninsula. The good news was battled a little bit of wind shear and actually weakened a bit as it did make landfall. Here's Cancun. You can see some of the damage. Some boats looks like maybe making their way to places they shouldn't. Yep, this looks like maybe a road, a walkway that some of the water came up on and the boats came to. And then, of course, a lot of downed tree limbs that'll need to be cleaned up and other structural damage to some of the buildings there. A lot of resorts there, a lot of stuff, unfortunately, in the zone that got hit from this. And then we also watched the U.S. Gulf Coast and some populated communities there as well. Category 2 hurricane when it made landfall here last night. So good news again, this weakened a bit as it made its way, actually this morning, I should say early this morning around 5:45 Central Time. It was a Category 2 with winds 110 miles an hour. So barely a Category 2, but still a Category 2, pressure 972 millibars. So again, some good news this time. Yesterday, of course, we were tracking a Category 4 storm, very concerned about what we could see. And while we've still seen the damage, we like to see that number backed off a little bit as the storm made its way towards Cozumel, towards Cancun. Sustained wind there in Cancun, 84 miles an hour, gust to 106 miles per hour. So no slouch by any means, this storm. Over the past 24 hours, again, this time yesterday into the evening hours, we were watching a very strong storm and then watching this back off. So this should actually say late Tuesday and then into today. We've seen those winds subsiding a bit. Now that it's over the Gulf, Mike, we are prepared to watch those numbers possibly climb again.
It's almost a certainty that they will. And we're answering your hurricane questions tonight. Appreciate you sending those. Make sure on Twitter you include the hashtag hurricane questions. Paula asking this, will Lake Charles, Louisiana need to be concerned with Hurricane Delta, even if it makes a landfall east? Infrastructure still weak from Hurricane Laura. A great question, Paula. Thank you so much for that. And we certainly are concerned about you there in Lake Charles because we know what you're going through right now. So many people still trying to just put their homes back together. We think we're going to get some pretty significant wind there. And again, minor shifts, east or west, can make a big difference for you there in Lake Charles. But right now, anticipating through Friday, wind gusts higher than 60 miles per hour, which could be just enough in some instances. And another 5 to 8 inches of rain could be coming your way. So some flooding could also be in the offing here. I don't think that we're going to get significant storm surge there in Lake Charles, but as of right now, I would expect the wind and the rain to be the biggest concerns for you. As much as a half a foot of rain anticipated, Lake Charles over toward Lafayette here and up toward Alexandria here. Those are all the areas highlighted in orange. And a solid 3 to 5 inches could go all the way up towards, say, Memphis, Tennessee. In Lafayette, wind gusts for us by Friday afternoon, 60+ miles per hour. At times that could be good enough, and with maybe a gust that goes higher than that, you could see portions of your roof peeled back. You could lose some trees or tree limbs in your yard. Rain, another 5 to 8 inches in the offing for you in Lafayette. So these are grounds that are already really saturated. Been a very wet 2020. Hurricane season hasn't helped at all, and so when you even get a couple of inches of rain, it's going to be a big deal. You go outside of the cone to the east, 1 to 2 inches of rain, we can handle that. You go west of the cone, 1 to 2 inches of rain in Houston, Galveston, we can handle that as well. Alex?
All right, still to come on the show tonight, we're answering your questions. Go on Twitter, use the hashtag Hurricane Questions, and we will be showing them on the air. And our coverage continues. Potential track of Delta. We're breaking down the latest models and what the Gulf Coast can expect and when.
What would Joe... You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
They're voluntary evacuations from the areas south of the Intercoastal Waterway. Those are the areas that always take on water when we have a storm like this.
Welcome back. Thanks for being with us tonight for an extended edition of Weather Underground.
Yeah, we're with you until 9 o'clock, answering all your questions and concerns about Hurricane Delta. You can submit them to us on Twitter. Use the hashtag Hurricane Questions. By the way, our coverage continues after Weather Underground. They'll be answering your questions as well. If you're looking for hurricane expert Dr. Nab, he's coming up at 9 p.m. Eastern.
Yeah, we're going to keep people informed all the way up through landfall and beyond, nonstop here on the Weather Channel. We know that those of you in Morgan City, Louisiana, are doing your best to prepare, as you should. Boarding up today ahead of Hurricane Delta, getting the shutters up here. I know it's a lot of work. It really is. When you're closing up shop and you're putting up the shutters, it's just not fun, and you've done it over and over and over again this season. Now, today there was a little bit of good news. We had some significant weakening of Hurricane Delta. Yesterday at this time, 145 mile per hour Category 4. Now, mid-grade Category 1 with 85 mile per hour winds. But don't be fooled that this won't become still a significant threat. It's starting to pull away from land. It'll go over warm Gulf of Mexico waters here and a lower wind shear environment. All those things are favorable for continued strengthening from this point going forward. Hurricane watch is in effect here, portions of Texas up through Louisiana here, and eventually these will be upgraded to warnings, we believe. Lake Charles, Lafayette, and Morgan City all included within that. There's another look at the satellite. I think we're going to get a little blow-up of convection around the center of this, and that may really start to congeal overnight tonight, and we could see a stronger hurricane as early as tomorrow morning here. Hurricane hunters have been out there flying around it. We got a couple of missions that'll be flying into it, and we're going to get some improved data from them. One thing that we've also had today, besides land interaction, is a little bit of shear that's coming here from the southeast. That's aided in the weakening of the system. But if you notice out here where it's headed, there's no wind shear. And so that very tranquil atmosphere means there is opportunity here for strengthening. And the lines that you see there are basically just the lines and the shear from the hurricane it's creating. And notice up here is where all the other wind shear is. So at this point, what I'm telling you folks is anticipate further strengthening. Could go back to a major hurricane, Alex, at this point. Peak intensity likely to be around 115 to 120 miles per hour.
Well, we want to check in with meteorologist Paul Goodlow. He's live for us tonight in New Orleans, a city that has seen a lot of Weather Channel crews throughout the year. Usually they've made out better than expected, but got to keep our eyes on this one closely.
Exactly, because last month I actually flew in here for Hurricane Sally and ended up driving eastward all the way towards Gulf Shores, Alabama, where it basically made landfall. So hopefully I'm not the one bringing the hurricanes this way. Right now, as you mentioned, the forecast should be making landfall west of us, which is not great news for people who live west of New Orleans, but that also is better news for people living here in New Orleans. We're here on the banks of the Mississippi River and you got the Crescent City Connection. That's the big bridge over there heading on towards the West Bank. So we're definitely going to have some impacts. We're under a tropical storm watch instead of a hurricane watch, which is some great news, but still it's not, we're out of the woods. We're still talking tropical storm force wind gusts, basically 40 miles per hour, well into perhaps the mid 70s as well. We do expect that to come through as we get on towards Friday. Tomorrow, we'll start seeing the winds gusting well over 20 miles per hour. So that basically the next 24 hours is the time you have to prepare. This city also sitting below sea level. You got Lake Pontchartrain to the north. We have the Mississippi River to the south and the east side. And the big concern is, what about the rain? How much rain can we deal with? Because we have to physically pump all that water out to keep the city from flooding. We are expecting on the lower end of the rain. Worst case, I'm thinking 3 to 4 inches. Best case, 1 to 2 inches, maybe even less than that. That's definitely something this city can deal with, over maybe a 24-hour period. So we can keep our fingers crossed that that's going to be it. But we do expect this will be perhaps a bigger wind damaging event than any other thing we've seen so far this season. Hopefully this is the last thing we will deal with this season. But you got to remember, Alex, this is October, so this is still kind of a busy section of hurricane season. Alex?
Absolutely. Still have to watch, even though, things start to cool off. We start to think fall. We're still very much in the thick of things with our hurricane season. Now, we've got severe weather, too, up in portions of the Northeast tonight. We are tracking those severe storms and getting some new pictures in Norwood, Massachusetts. Here you can see plenty of tree limbs down. We saw wind reports in the 60 to 70 mile an hour range. 95,000 customers are without power in the state of Massachusetts. We've got thousands without power in the state of New York as well. Still dealing with some warnings as that last bit of New England gets in on those strong gusty winds, including places like Plymouth.
Severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel.
I'd say this is about the 5th time we've taken the boats out, or at least getting all the rods and all the gear out, and just kind of went home and watched and waited.
A lot of people in the same boat, literally. I mean, no pun intended there, as Lance. Is it just constant threats in Louisiana this hurricane season? You can see we've had some beach erosion. We've got some, we really tried to shore up these levees to keep them from eroding so that water doesn't go right into these neighborhoods. But they've taken a beating this year, that's for sure. And you can see that they've, so far, for the most part, done their job. For a place like Louisiana, it has been storm after storm after storm this year, and here we go again. We're under hurricane watches and tropical storm watches. These eventually will be upgraded to warnings here, but we've done this time and time again. You take a look at what the Delta forecast is, and it's basically Louisiana again. If you remember when Hurricane Laura came in, hitting Cameron, then rolled right up into Lake Charles, did some really significant damage in Lake Charles. And if you follow just the center line here, likely landfall somewhere between Cameron and, say, like a Pecan Island here. It could be about a Category 2, give or take, but Category 2, I wouldn't rule out, a low-end Category 3 making landfall here, but there have been 3 landfalls so far this year in Louisiana, and 7 previous seasons have had 3 landfalls in Louisiana, as far back as 1860, as most recently as 2017. And so far this year, it's been Cristobal, Marco, and Laura, and now with Delta, we'll make it 4, and a record-setting season for Louisiana is anticipated. Albeit, again, Marco wasn't much of anything. It barely grazed us here at the mouth of the Mississippi. Cristobal produced a decent amount of rain. Laura, it was a surge and rain and wind in Lake Charles with significant damage in Lake Charles. New Orleans, by the way, has been in the cone from the Hurricane Center 6 different times this season alone. Houston's been in it 5. Miami's been in it 3 different times. Although New Orleans, I will say, we've dodged some bullets here. We haven't had significant impact. Light amount of rain for a tropical system and light amount of wind for tropical systems, and we're hoping that we don't get hit hard by this Hurricane Delta. Well, we know it's been some spooky sights in California's Creek Fire as the trees burn from the inside out. Look at that. This in Fresno County, California here. The fire burning here in the Sierra Nevada mountains, nearly 50% contained at this point. It's just been a crazy year for us, unfortunately, across the West. Then you take a look at this insane video of the Beachy Creek Fire exploding and burning down a DOT camera in Oregon last month. Wow, it's wild to see. This fire burned 700 homes. One of the worst fires in state history. Crazy to see, all captured there by a DOT camera. Now in the west, we still have big issues here. We still have elevated fire danger across the Texas Panhandle, across the Intermountain West, a lot of Wyoming, a lot of Montana, even portions of Montana in critical fire danger here through the day tomorrow. You look at where all the fires are burning right now, there's really not a western state that's being missed at this point. 70 active fires that are more than 100 acres. Total acreage burned now is 4.2 million acres, a devastating number for sure, and it just continues. And did you know that wildfires can actually make their own weather? And over the past few months, we've seen them create fire nados or fire worlds, as they're called. Jim Cantore shows us how climate change is making these rare occurrences happen more frequently.
Being up close to a raging wildfire like this one is a terrifying experience. Unfortunately, scenes like this are going to be more common as climate change increases wildfire activity. Average annual temperatures across the western U.S. have risen nearly 2 degrees in the past few decades, allowing large wildfires to thrive on these dry, extreme conditions. You can just feel the heat. Temperatures over 1,500 degrees, flames shooting high into the air. Guess what? We can get fire whirls that develop in an instant. Pockets of extreme temperature causing the air to accelerate upward, right? Air rushing in toward the ground to fill the void. Rotation tightens and produces a column of swirling fire and smoke. These fire whirls, as they're called, are often short-lived and usually less than 50 feet across. But under certain conditions, large fires, like this one, can generate pyrocumulus thunderstorms that can produce large, long-lasting fire nados. They can be hundreds of feet across and thousands of feet tall. Look at the size of that thing. Could you imagine the power? They combine the intensity of the raging fire with the destructive power of a tornado. Winds over 140 miles an hour leave a trail of destruction and create extremely hazardous conditions for firefighters. Unfortunately, this terrifying display might be showing up more often as warming temperatures and drying conditions become more prevalent across the western United States.
A lot more to come here on Weather Underground. We hope you can stick around. We've got continuing coverage of Hurricane Delta. This powerful storm closes in on the Gulf Coast here later in the week. So we're going to take you back to the areas that are in the bullseye as we're forecasting it to re-intensify back into a Category 3 hurricane. Also for you tonight, a look at where we could see significant inland impacts after landfall. Where could we see flooding? Where could we see wind damage? Where could power be knocked out? We're going to detail those locations straight ahead. And also following a really intense squall line coming through the Northeast tonight, packing winds of 66 miles an hour in Boston, through Rhode Island, and now through coastal Massachusetts under a severe thunderstorm warning now, including around New Bedford, Newport, Barnstable, Bristol, and Plymouth counties, all under severe thunderstorm warnings.
It's your daily dose of everything weather.
Wow!
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Live in New Orleans, the Crescent City. All types of transportation going by. We got a train coming by behind the camera, then even behind me, this huge tanker ship coming on through here. Just a reminder that, yeah, Louisiana, we got the Mississippi A lot of commerce going in and out of this area right through the river as well. So there's always a concern when you have a major hurricane, or used to be a major hurricane in the Gulf headed this way, because anytime something's in the Gulf, it's going to make landfall. And once again, Louisiana is in that target zone. We'll have a hurricane making landfall within 48 hours here. We're under a tropical storm watch, not a hurricane watch, which is fortunate because we do expect mainly tropical storm conditions versus hurricane conditions. But farther west, different story. We're going to be dealing with perhaps a Category 2, maybe Category 3 hurricane coming on through. So definitely a big concern as you're dealing with people who live in the lower parishes, which don't have protection by levees. We have a levee wall here across the Mississippi. And then on the north side of the city, we have Lake Pontchartrain, which also is a body of water, huge body of water, which will be impacted by the predominant easterly winds we'll see only increase tomorrow, then into Friday as we have the approach and landfall of Hurricane Delta. Again, that east wind will definitely push even some of the Mississippi water here to match the east direction, probably onshore, perhaps causing some wave action, definitely on Lake Pontchartrain. Most likely have a location there tomorrow as those winds pick up. But Mike, again, 6 times this year, this season, hurricane season, New Orleans has been in that cone. 5 times, including now, we've been under tropical storm watches. It's been quite the year here.
Indeed it has. I got to hand it to you, Paul. That's some impeccable concentration with all that commotion going on behind you. I applaud you with the laser focus there. Folks, obviously, we've got concerns. We had a really significant hurricane yesterday. It was 145 mile per hour Category 4. Some interaction with land, a little bit of wind shear today has certainly weakened it. That's been a good thing, right? We're down to an 85 mile per hour hurricane, but we're going to go right back into an atmosphere that's more favorable for intensification. Again, I don't think we're going to go back to 145, but we could go right back to a Category 3. I think the more convection we get tonight, the more likelihood we are to see a little bit more intense winds in the morning. So tonight we might go to bed with an 85 mile per hour hurricane and wake up tomorrow morning. Wouldn't be surprised to see a 100 mile an hour hurricane. We're going over warm sea surface temperatures and an atmosphere with low shear that's pretty favorable at this point. You can see where it's headed. Louisiana, the most likely target here. High-end Category 2, maybe a Category 3 at landfall. I think either way, whether it's a high-end 2 or low-end 3, it's the same effect for you here. But Lake Charles, Lafayette, all the way to Memphis, potentially all the way up toward the Ohio River Valley could be affected by this with rain all outside the cone too, especially on the eastern side of it. There's a look at the water vapor, the green and the yellow, the areas where you have the most moisture in the atmosphere, the orange areas where you have the dry air, and that dry air is nowhere near where the hurricane is at this point. So it's fending that off, and it's going to a very moist atmosphere at this point. And we could see a little burst of convection happen overnight. We're starting to see that right there already. See that in the last couple of frames? You see those little higher cloud tops that pop up. So nocturnal or nighttime convection often happens, and we're going to see that, I think, tonight. Tropical storm force winds extend out about 125 miles from the center with a smaller core of hurricane force winds. That core of hurricane force winds expands marginally. The tropical storm force winds expand out to about 160 miles per hour up toward landfall here, so expecting it to increase in intensity and in size up through landfall happening by Friday. Alexandria, all the way up, I think, toward Memphis. Memphis might get a center of circulation that comes right over top of it, but very gusty winds throughout the deep south and then the mid-south as well. And we know that if you're told to evacuate, you certainly should. So it's very important, especially this season with a pandemic, to be aware of the zone that you live in or a zone that you might be visiting. Meteorologist Paul Goodlow has some tips for you.
Hurricane evacuation saves countless lives each year. So it's important to know if you live in an evacuation zone and how to escape the area. Evacuations vary by state and locality. Some cities and counties provide maps so residents know their zone, but some areas don't make that determination in advance. Check with your town or Office of Emergency Management if you have any questions because evacuation zones can change from year to year. Plan your evacuation route in advance. If you're going on a trip, find out about evacuation zones from your hotel. Listen for updates from local officials. And if you live in an evacuation zone, be ready to go immediately if orders come to get out of the area.
All right, coming up here on Weather Underground, continuing to break down the future track of Hurricane Delta. and where we're zeroing in on for landfall. And look at what the hurricane hunters are finding for you tonight as Delta threatens to intensify once again.
Well, right now on Weather Underground, Hurricane Delta entering the Gulf of Mexico and closing in on the U.S. coast. Hurricane and storm surge watches issued for parts of the Texas and Louisiana coastline, including many of the same areas ravaged by Hurricane Laura in late August. We've got live team coverage.
And Delta battering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula overnight. The storm making landfall with winds of 105 miles per hour, knocking out power, slamming the resort areas of Cancun and Cozumel with dangerous storm surge. And tonight, Hurricane Hunter missions ongoing as this storm threatens to intensify once again. We have in-depth analysis of Delta's future track in every scenario for landfall and beyond. It's all next on a special extended edition of Weather Underground. Glad you're with us tonight. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. We are covering every angle of Hurricane Delta to help you get ready. So if you've got any questions, send them our way on Twitter using the hashtag #HurricaneQuestions. Now, after making landfall in Mexico, Hurricane Delta is looking stronger and it's reorganizing. Currently a Category 1 hurricane, but now over the warm waters of the Gulf of Mexico, Mike, we are anticipating strengthening before this is expected to make landfall by the end of the week.
All right, now, the thing about it is this. We're getting a few blowups of convection near the center, so might get some nighttime storms that fire up here and get some stuff to congeal around the center and maybe an intensifying hurricane come the morning. By tomorrow, anticipated to be, though, tomorrow morning, a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane. I don't see any reason why it wouldn't necessarily be that. And then tomorrow evening, we'll be on the precipice of a Category 3 again, so it's going to go right back and ramp back up. I don't know if it's going to go all the way back up to a Category 4 again. That's not in the official forecast, but it could get intense. And then a little bit, maybe slight weakening as it comes in for a landfall in Louisiana, the most likely location, and then racing its way after that this weekend through the Ohio Valley even. Hurricane watches in effect here, coastal Louisiana, tropical storm watches that do include Baton Rouge as well as New Orleans. In there is really the area that's really blossomed here recently, and so I think we're going to now start to get some thunderstorms that come around the center there, and if that wraps around the center, that's when you're really going to see a storm intensify. It's been holding off the dry air well off to the east, the dry air is well off to the west here as well, so there are some areas where it's dry, but it's not dry air getting pulled into the hurricane necessarily, and it's over warm water. Water temperatures here are going to be in the mid-80s here, so nothing to slow it down there, and wind shear is all displaced up here into the continental U.S. So low wind shear environment, warm sea surface temperatures, no dry air. We're off to the races with this thing, Alex, over the next, say, 24 to 36 hours.
Yeah, and here's what we know at this hour. States of emergency have been declared in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. In Louisiana, mandatory evacuations are in place in Calcasieu, Cameron, and Vermilion parishes. The president was briefed today on the storm. He's asking Gulf Coast residents to pay close attention to what their state officials are asking them to do. And the Missouri LSU game will move to Columbia, Missouri to get out of Delta's path. Louisiana Ragin' Cajuns have also postponed their game that was scheduled to be in Lafayette on Saturday. Right now, I want to check in with meteorologist Paul Goodloe. He is live for us this evening in New Orleans. Looking nice now, but we know that storm headed our way, and yet another one New Orleans at least needs to prepare for. Hopefully, like the last few, a last-second change of plans will spare the city.
Yeah, this is the 6th time we've been in a National Hurricane Center forecast cone. No longer in that cone, but we're under a tropical storm watch. 5th time we've done that. And I tell you what, this city is still kind of struggling because it relies a lot on tourism for the economy here. It's still struggling because of COVID-19. A lot of things are still shut down. So I guess if there is a good time to have multiple threats from tropical systems coming in one season, I guess put it on this year. But yeah, there's never a good time, but it's always bad times. It's definitely a bad time with COVID as well. But we do think we'll probably have the most impacts than the other 5 times we're under tropical storm watches here, because as Delta starts moving on towards the coast as we head throughout the next 48 hours, it's going to also expand its wind field, and that's why we're under this tropical storm watch. So tropical storm force winds start at, say, 39 miles per hour, go up to 74. So that's what we're going to experience as we head on towards your Friday. But starting tomorrow night, this time tomorrow, we'll probably have maybe winds 20, 25 or more gusting and only increasing. So if you are preparing, perhaps making sure you don't have any loose limbs on trees nearby, or if you're a boat owner, battening down the hatches and double mooring, everything you can do, because we are expecting the strong winds to really pick up tomorrow. Rainfall, which is always a big threat here, as well as storm surge, but the rainfall, because we're below sea level, all the water has to be pumped out. We're expecting those numbers to be on the lower end, hopefully just 1 to 2 inches, but it could be 3 to 4 inches. But even that, over, say, a 24 or 36-hour period, is something we can handle here in New Orleans, as long as it's kind of stretched out over that time. You don't want to see that in 1 or 2 hours. That will definitely cause flooding. And storm surge is definitely a concern farther on towards the south and east, as well as what's going on Lake Pontchartrain on the northern side of the city. We're going to see those winds strong from the east and eventually east-northeast and northeast winds. It's going to be a concern, though, even on the north side of the city, to have those waves and that surge, that wind-driven surge from Delta, long before it makes landfall. Something we'll definitely watch as we head over the next couple of days and await landfall. Yet again, another landfalling hurricane here in the U.S. in this crazy year of 2020. Mike?
Yeah, it's been a wild year, and here we go again in Louisiana. Paul, thanks for the update there. You know, the good news at this point is, if there is any, that the hurricane's weakened pretty significantly. It's got to take some time to ramp back up again. We do think that happens, but as far as where it's going, that's kind of locked in. We got high pressure that sits there over the Atlantic, and that's been pushing it to the west here. That will continue to push it to the west or northwest here over the course of the next 24 hours. As the system moves into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, though, and it's going to slowly begin to drift north as the high pressure backs off a little bit. But then the next steering component that comes in is this jet stream trough that picks it up. And instead of going just slamming right into it, not going to do that. It's got to flow with the atmosphere. Everything's fluid here, so it's going to gradually flow with it. So as it comes in, it's going to start to do one of these, all right? So we're going to come in this direction, then around and do one of these. So northwest, north, and then eventually off to the northeast here. But we feel pretty confident in the fact it's coming into Louisiana. When you take a look at the forecast cone, primarily in Louisiana, the middle of the GFS, Global Forecast Systems model, goes right down the middle of the cone. And the GFS has actually been a very decent model this year when it comes to hurricanes. It actually outperformed the European model. And all the GFS ensemble members are within the cone at landfall. That tells you something. That's high confidence that they're all aiming in the same direction. And all the other computer models beyond the GFS, almost all of them are within the cone as well. So it stands to reason that cone hasn't changed much here, Alex, in the last 24 hours, and we squarely have it right into Louisiana.
Yes, and so the state is preparing, once again, a new video for you of Grand Isle, Louisiana. Levee preps, they're getting them ready with sandbags ahead of the storm. You can see the machinery they use. You know, people get to pick up the sandbags at the locations, and they're even using the industrial size sandbags here along the Grand Isle area. Storm surge will be a threat here moving forward. And so when we look at the communities that could be affected, we again could be looking at a life-threatening storm surge when we talk about some of those values. First, the storm surge watches. They've been posted from portions of East Texas all the way over into portions of Alabama. So Mississippi, Louisiana coastlines completely included. Storm surge potential. Now, this doesn't mean everybody in the zone will get this much, but 7 to 11 feet of surge possible in this stretch from south central to southeastern Louisiana moving forward. And it is the Gulf Coast that's so susceptible to surge because of that very shallow shelf. So we always talk about the Gulf Coast and the Gulf Coast of Florida as opposed to the other side of the state with a much deeper shelf. This allows for a much more significant surge threat. And also the storm is expected to increase in size. And that means we could be looking at a greater surge threat because those larger storms produce a higher surge because wind pushes on a larger area of the ocean, or in this case, the Gulf, and the stronger wind affects an area for a longer time. So sometimes I think we look at these storms weakening and go, oh, good, but if it weakens a bit and increases in size, the effects can be similar, if not worse. So if you are in that storm surge area, find out. First, look it up, get the information, decide where you would go if you're told to leave, how you would get there, and consider special needs when you're deciding on a shelter. Do you have pets? Do you have medical supplies? Do you need a certain type of shelter? Now, if you're in a safe place, Be a friend's evacuation spot. Say you're farther to the north, but you know somebody down along the coast. Say, hey, come stay with me for a few days and evacuate right away when you're told to do so. Don't evacuate vertically in a high rise as well. Sometimes I think in some of these areas where people have high rise apartments, Mike, they think to go up, but the wind could be worse higher up.
Definitely can. So when do those winds come? A lot of folks are wondering that. For a place like Grand Isle, Louisiana, you'll be one of the first places to get it because, listen, we're way out there and we're susceptible, right? We're out there kind of at the edge. And roads like this susceptible because you're going to have the wind-driven water that pushes in, and surge could overtake some of these roads that have water already on a dry day on both sides. So let's talk about the winds and when they approach. For most of us in the coastal locations, it's Friday morning when the tropical storm force winds begin, and then the winds only just ramp up throughout the day on Friday. There's a look at the tropical storm force winds, that disc of yellow. That extends out 125 miles from the center as of now, and that could get bigger going into landfall here, so it could affect more places. So certainly Louisiana, but maybe going as far west as Houston and Galveston, could go as far east as Morgan City and beyond, and could even affect you there in a place like Baton Rouge as well as New Orleans. There's a look at a potential landfall middle of the day, let's say on Friday. Strong winds, though, will extend outside the cone. So there's the cone, right? But you can see we've got strong winds on each side, different directions. There'll be the surge on that eastern side or over toward maybe New Orleans, and there could even be some whitecaps, I think, on Lake Pontchartrain. But the winds will go beyond the cone. There's more than just the cone. Think that, okay, I'm not in the cone, I don't have a risk. You do, and watch even go in interior here. We could see, high wind gusts here that could bring down some tree limbs, could bring down some trees and maybe some power outages. All right, so winds increase throughout the day tomorrow. The big show comes in on Friday, but tomorrow evening, winds will be gusty, 20 to 25. Friday morning, getting now to tropical storm force strength. And then, of course, when it makes a landfall in Louisiana on Friday afternoon or evening, winds very gusty, especially right around the center there. They could be gusting over 100 miles an hour. Alex?
Well, city officials began closing the seawalls today in Morgan City, Louisiana. That's where we find our own Mike Seidel.
This is the Atchafalaya River here in Morgan City, Louisiana, and it is going to come up for shore with that surge forecast. Delta making its approach and landfalling likely south and west of here sometime later Friday. The water comes up. Now, they are dredging the river. They do this all the time to keep the harbor nice and deep for navigation and for shipping. But I want to show you the saving grace here in Morgan City. Look at this monster seawall. They doubled the height of this back in the 1980s. This was completed in 1985 at 22 feet. And look at this giant door, this gate. This morning we're here, look at this. This is how they close it. It's pretty simple. They just attach a chain to a piece of heavy equipment and they just pull it closed. They've got about 40 of these to close up ahead of Hurricane Delta. But we talked to city officials and they're not overly concerned because of where the water level sits right now on the Atchafalaya River.
Hurricane Barry just last year, this river was already at 7, meaning we would be standing this deep in water right now and then put a storm surge on top of that. Now we've got easily 3 feet before it gets to the top of the bank, so we've got a little more capacity to handle that, so that puts us a little bit at ease. Unfortunately for the people that are on the unprotected side of the river here, they're just going to get subject to flooding.
And thankfully the river is down. Their biggest concern here, we talked to the mayor and other city officials, the wind. Worried about structural damage and by and far power outages. Remember with Laura, the storm was far enough west, they didn't get nearly as much wind. So this time around, they could get wind gusts in excess of hurricane force, and that could knock out quite a bit of power. I'm meteorologist Mike Seidel, the Weather Channel, Morgan City, Louisiana.
We're expecting a heavy rainfall footprint out of this storm. The good news is the storm will be moving, so that'll help to mitigate some of the rainfall potential. European model has the heaviest rainfall across central and southwestern Louisiana, 8 to 12 inches there, but that stretch of 5 to 8 inches all the way up towards the Memphis area. Then we look at the USGFS, confines the area of heaviest rain a little farther to the south and also a little farther to the east with some of that heavier rain, so even portions of western Mississippi. But look at that bullseye around Lake Charles, where we could see possibly over a foot of rain. That could lead to some significant flash flooding dangers for residents in those communities. European models showing some of that precip beginning later tomorrow. So through the afternoon and the evening, we're going to see that rainfall pick up in intensity, and it's going to be coming down during the day on Friday, even into early Saturday morning. You can still see some of that heavier rain across northern Louisiana, southern Arkansas, lightening up through the day as the storm weakens on Saturday, but still moderate to heavy downpours across sections of western Kentucky, western Tennessee by late on Saturday, and then eventually by the end of the weekend working its way into the Ohio Valley, parts of the mid-Atlantic as well, with rain and some gusty winds. So tomorrow into early Friday, areas to watch for the possibility of flash flooding include most of Louisiana, southern third of Mississippi, and southern sections of Alabama, even western parts of the Florida Panhandle. Mike, Friday into early Saturday, really have to watch areas around Lake Charles.
Thank you for that, Alex. Also watching storms tonight across the Northeast. Big thunderstorms knocking out power to nearly 400,000 customers at this hour. And you can see what happened here in Milton, Massachusetts. Check this out. Trees coming down, sparking, arcing the power lines here. Again, one of the reasons we've got hundreds of thousands of customers without power right now. Winds gusting between 60 and 70 miles an hour in a lot of places with really strong squall lines. Through Boston now, we've got one severe thunderstorm warning that remains out here at coastal Massachusetts, Barnstable, Dukes, and Plymouth counties, all under severe thunderstorm warnings. But the damage at this point has been done as those storms begin to exit for us here. 180 different severe weather reports this afternoon.
A woman.
Well, this is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow, live in the Crescent City of New Orleans, Louisiana. And once again, we are watching another hurricane in the Gulf approaching the state of Louisiana. This time, we think the landfall will be well to the west of New Orleans, but impacts will also be here in this city. And rainfall, not as big of a threat in terms of what's looming over our heads here in New Orleans as the wind will be, because the wind field's expanding as our hurricane expands, as it approaches the coast for landfall sometime perhaps late on Friday. We do expect wind to be the biggest issue across the area, more so than any other storm or hurricane or threat we've been under so far this hurricane season. So a unique threat. Normally you think New Orleans and flooding and storm surge and heavy rain. We think we'll have all those, but we think the wind will be the biggest threat here as we head over the next 48, maybe even 72 hours. But again, there are other areas, Alex, that will see the direct hit of this. And one of those areas really not too far from Lake Charles, Louisiana, and Cameron, Louisiana, areas that really do not need any more of this.
Do not want it. Just had Laura move through, and now looking at yet another impactful hurricane. Well, this is what Delta looked like as it neared land this morning. Early this morning, Playa del Carmen in Mexico, the location of this video. Listen to that wind. Now, it officially made landfall there on the Yucatan Peninsula as a Category 2, so weakened a bit as we move through the late evening and overnight, sparing them a major hurricane landfall, but you can still see the results. Some downed trees, also damage to some of the buildings around the Cancun area. You can see this person's drive got a little weavy as they had to make their way around a lot of those fallen trees. But again, spared of the worst case scenario, which was a Category 4 hurricane. If you were with us this time yesterday, we were tracking a storm with winds 145 miles an hour. Weakened a bit, so made landfall as a Category 2, a strong Category 2, 110 mile per hour wind, pressure of 972 millibars. There's a look at the enhanced satellite picture as it made its way onto that eastern coastline, right around the Cozumel area. Cancun also getting in on some of the strongest winds, even though this was only a Category 2, of course, compared to the forecast. A very strong Category 2 that brought winds gusting to 106 miles per hour there in Cancun, a sustained wind of 84 miles per hour. Last 24 hours, we've seen that weakening, and now we're holding around 85 miles an hour. However, with this thing back out over the Gulf, we anticipate that strengthening once again. This storm, Delta, now not on the list of major hurricanes near Cancun. We thought this would be the first since Wilma back in 2005, but again, as a strong Category 2, not a major hurricane, Mike, when it made landfall. I think a lot of people saying it's cool with us.
100% cool with us, no question about that. We're answering your questions tonight, so keep sending them to us on Twitter. Use this hashtag, Hurricane Questions with your question. Craig asks this: will Delta bring the potential impact of storm surge in Lake Charles, Louisiana, like the past other systems in midsummer? Thanks for the question, Craig. I've got some good news. I don't think it's going to be quite like what we saw with, say, Hurricane Laura. And that was a different animal. They came in at a different angle, and it was more intense than we think this one is going to be. Having said that, I wouldn't say you're not going to get any, but it was the location that was everything there. And if this one goes maybe just to your east or maybe even right over you like Laura did, I think you'll reduce the storm surge. So for Lake Charles, we think that 60+ mile per hour wind gusts begin by Friday morning. Gusts could go over 75. It's very possible. But rain, 5 to 8 inches coming your way, and that could cause some flooding. I know a lot of you are still recovering in Lake Charles, so this is not a good forecast, that's for sure. Again, Lake Charles sitting right in here. The forecast cone basically looks like this. All right, so that puts us at risk here in Lake Charles. If it goes off to your east, that's better. If it goes to your west, that's not as good because that will bring in some storm surge into Lake Charles. And we saw that we had some pretty significant storm surge forecasts when it came to Laura. So we'll see how this all plays out. We've got some time here still, but not a good scenario for us here in coastal Louisiana or any areas up to, say, I-10. Lafayette, Friday evening is when Friday afternoon, I should say, is when we think the 60+ mile per hour gusts come your way, and 5 to 8 inches of rain is also headed your way. Let's go east of the cone now, because there can be effects outside of the cone. From Gulfport to Pensacola to Mobile, roughly an inch of rain is anticipated. We can handle that. Let's go west of the cone now. Say Beaumont and Port Arthur, 3 to 4 inches of rain is coming your way, we think, but in Houston and Galveston, upwards of an inch. We're going to be on the good side, if you will, of the storm, Alex. The western side will have the lower impacts.
Yeah, that's the side you want to be on, of course, watching the areas that end up on the eastern side. Much more to come on tonight's show. We're answering your questions. If you haven't asked, but you've got one, head to Twitter. Use the hashtag Hurricane Questions. We'll be answering them throughout the show tonight.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network.
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
The Weather Channel. Get your daily dose of everything weather on Quibi. From the viral
Now to the weather video that we cannot stop watching.
to the vital
Get ready because we are in for another wet week.
and all the wonderful weather in between.
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
There are voluntary evacuations from the areas south of the Intercoastal Waterway. Those are the areas that always take on water when we have a storm like this.
us tonight for an extended edition of Weather Underground. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. We are with you tonight until 9 o'clock, answering all your questions and concerns about Delta. By the way, our coverage continues after that. If you've got a question, submit it to us on Twitter. Is the hashtag Hurricane Questions. We'll answer them on our show. And if you're saying, hey, where's hurricane expert Dr. Nab? He's coming up after us at 9 p.m.
Guys, in prime time tonight.
That's right. Yeah. Well, he leaves us in the dust.
Like,
well, it's kind of important.
Those two.
You've got questions, you've got answers, and he's got answers. So all the way through this evening and tonight, we got you covered.
You know, and here we go again in Louisiana, Alex. We've done this dance way too many times. Boarding up, putting up the shutters in the businesses in Morgan City, Louisiana. We could be at risk here from some pretty significant wind, surge, as well as rainfall. So you got to prepare. I know it's exhausting. I know you've done it time and time again, but you got to do it. This is going to be a threat for us here in southern Louisiana. There's a look at the hurricane right now, Category 1, 85-mile-per-hour winds. The interaction with Mexico right here, as well as some wind shear, has weakened it pretty significantly today. So we've got a new starting point, if you will. So now we've got to ramp back up again. We think we will, but we've certainly weakened a lot today. There's been a little blow up there. You see that in the last couple of frames? Been a little blow up of convection or thunderstorms near the center. And I think we're well on our way to seeing a strengthening hurricane overnight tonight. And I wouldn't be surprised to see 100 or higher hurricane wind speed tomorrow morning. There's a look at the infrared, and you've got the taller cloud tops right there in the middle, but a lot of open water that we'll be dealing with here. So they've taken off here. The Air Force Hurricane Hunters have. They'll be flying a low-level mission. They're going to do a little crisscross through this, so they're just now getting there. We'll get some more data from them, and potentially, let's see, what time is it? It's 7:30. Potentially, they could use some of these passes from this Hurricane Hunter to update the wind speed with the advisory that comes out in about 25 to 30 minutes. All right, so we've had a little bit of wind shear that has weakened the storm somewhat today, but more or less the land interaction has. But now notice out here, there is no wind shear. All the really strong wind shear is up here. And remember, wind shear really tears hurricanes apart. We're always rooting for wind shear. That's just not going to happen with this. Might closer to a landfall, but I think at that point we're still looking at a pretty significant Category 2 or Category 3 hurricane. But Louisiana seems to be the spot. All the reliable models bring it right into southern Louisiana. And the forecast with low wind shear, with warm sea surface temperatures here that are mid-80s, you don't even get below 80 till right at the coastline. That's not going to do anything to deter this thing from strengthening. So everything working in its favor here, and a forecast track that's locked in, Alex. So right now we feel pretty confident in the forecast.
Yeah, I want to check in with meteorologist Paul Goodloe. They're watching that forecast very closely in the New Orleans area. In the meantime, really nice evening. You know, we saw people, pets out there enjoying the evening, Paul, but we know things could be much different 48 hours from now.
Even 24 hours from now, Alex, we'll start seeing our winds, which is basically non-existent, maybe 5 to 10 occasionally. That's going to increase to maybe 20, 25 this time tomorrow. Again, we're about 4 minutes away from the official sunset time this evening. Sun coming up just before 7 a.m. tomorrow. Basically from sun up to about sundown tomorrow, that is your time to finish your preparations here across the Crescent City. Now, a lot of people out here filling sandbags. Rain, we'll have some. We're probably thinking that 1 to 2 inch. It could be worst case, maybe 3 to 4, but even that is kind of best case for New Orleans, who really can't handle more than 2 inches of rain in 2 hours, because you'll see some flooding. The first inch, the pumps got that. Everything else is a half inch an hour after that. So to be overwhelmed by heavy rain is something we are always concerned with. We don't think that's going to be the biggest issue. I think the biggest issue is the winds coming in from the east, maybe even northeast, east-northeast as well. That's going to slam this part of the river, kind of bends north to south here, so we have the east wind coming right this way. But this is just the Mississippi River, which kind of bends around this city. On the north side, we have Lake Pontchartrain, much bigger body of water. We get those northeast and east-northeast winds. We're going to have some of that water, the waves, and even surge from the wind here push on through. The great news, Alex, is this is not going to be slowly moving like, say, Sally was last month. This thing is coming in and moving on, which is the best case scenario. If you have to have something make landfall, you want it to be progressive. Move in and move on.
Yes, and so many times we get those storms that just sit around. So again, at least we could look at one positive of this, that it's going to move. Well, coming up on the show, our coverage of Delta continues. And don't forget, you can get more tropical coverage throughout social media. Follow Pattern, Twitter, Facebook, Instagram.
If I pass.
You're watching America's most trusted TV news network,
We've got a severe weather threat.
Winds have been gusting the full force of this thing.
the Weather Channel.
I'd say this is about the 5th time we've taken the boats out, or at least getting all the rods and all the gear out, and just kind of went home and watched and waited.
It's truly been the story of the 2020 hurricane season in Louisiana now. 6 times Louisiana, New Orleans, been in the forecast cone. Delta makes it there. It's going to make a record-breaking year in places here like Grand Isle, Louisiana, where we get the man-made levees. We try to hold back the water. They were shoring those up again today, putting sandbags on them, but it's just a repetitive season. It's kind of like the Groundhog Day of hurricane seasons, isn't it? For Louisiana, here we go. Hurricane watches, in effect, does include a small section here of Texas as well. That's going to be around the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. But if you look at the forecast for Delta, solidly in Louisiana, Category 2 or Category 3. A little bit of wiggle room there, but we think this happens Friday. And if you look at the record for most landfalls in a season in Louisiana, 3 different seasons had 3 landfalls, as far back as 1860, as most recently as 2002, 5, and 2017. And this year we've had 3, Cristobal, Marco, and Laura. And with now Delta, it's almost a certainty it will be 4. There are the 3 that we've had. Laura, far and away, was the worst. It was a Category 4 hurricane making landfall around Cameron, really did a number on us in Lake Charles. Marco barely grazed us, and Cristobal brought us some wind and mostly rain more than anything else, slow-moving systems. But 6 times New Orleans has been in the cone more than any other city in the United States. Houston, 5 different times we've been in the forecast cone this season. So for New Orleans,
climate is helping to spark new danger.
This is an unprecedented fire season here in California. More than 4 million acres burned already, not to mention the homes and the businesses and the lives lost all throughout the West. So what is driving all of this?
It's really nasty, Brent.
They're called Very Large Air Tankers. These flights over flaming hillsides are now a common sight.
And you're cleared to drop.
Because there's no denying it, these fires are becoming larger, more destructive, and more frequent than ever before.
Things will burn hotter. The fires will be more aggressive.
The Glass Fire in Napa Valley is now nearly 70,000 acres. In the past, a fire a third that size may have happened once a year.
This year, we're looking at multiple 300,000, 800,000, 200,000 acre fires. These are huge swaths of California that have burned this year.
But this is one of those recurring nightmares. For example, 56 years ago, the Hanley Fire burned through wine country. Then in 2017, a repeat from the Tubbs Fire. Same area, different climate.
That fire in 1964 took 3.5 days. What the same fire in 2017 took 3.5 hours. What's going on in California is really the result of
California's windy season is just getting started. Diablo and Santa Ana winds could easily fan this destruction right into next year.
It's not just land use planning. It's not just more staffing. It's not just more defensible space and more vegetation management. It's more of all of those things.
There's simply more heat available these days. In the last 5 years, there's been an increase in temperature in the overnight hours. That allows the trees and the leaves to get super crispy and ready to burn when the blazing sun comes out in the morning. In Santa Rosa, California, Dave Malkoff, The Weather Channel.
Amazing stuff there in California. Dave, thank you. And still to come on Weather Underground, our continuing coverage of Delta as this hurricane closes in on the U.S. Gulf Coast. We're going to take you back to areas that are in the bullseye, including in New Orleans, Louisiana. But you look at what Delta's doing right now, 85-mile-per-hour winds, Category 1, moving to the northwest at 17 miles per hour. Within the next 10 to 15 minutes, we're expecting a new advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and Hurricane Hunter planes are flying in there right now. They are finding hurricane-force winds. We're going to have the very latest on Delta, its future track, straight ahead in our next hour, Weather Underground.
What would almost
Get your daily daily dose of everything weather.
Wow!
Boy, do we have a lot to talk about.
Weather Today from the Weather Channel. New episodes every day, only on Quibi.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Goodlow, live in New Orleans, Louisiana, and it's here. The cloud band from Hurricane Delta, already seeing in the skies here as the sun is just set here. You see kind of the curved clouds. These are the outermost cloud bands of Hurricane Delta, which is still about 500 miles away. The center is, but these things are huge, and also the field is expanding. So is the cloud field as well. So you might hear other people talk about feeder bands. There's no feeder bands. Nothing feeds a hurricane except the ocean feeds the, and so no bands of rain feed this thing. But these are the outer cloud bands we're already seeing here on shore in Louisiana. So coming on shore will be that center over the next 48 hours. We're under a tropical storm watch here in New Orleans, which means we expect tropical storm conditions, not hurricane conditions. But that's the forecast right now. We expect that to hold tight. But I tell you what, in terms of when these things make landfall, the National Hurricane Center, they'll even tell you themselves, their track forecast is a little more accurate than their intensity forecast. Right now, their intensity forecast, category 2, but a strong 2, could be a category 3 hurricane, could be another major hurricane. The bottom line is they're pretty certain where it's going, and it's coming to Louisiana. New Orleans will be on the east side of that center, the kind of bad side of that center, but we should be far enough east where we won't see those constant hurricane conditions like residents well west of us will be dealing with. And unfortunately, Mike, this center could be coming way too close for comfort to even Lake Charles, Louisiana. And by the way, there are a lot of residents from Lake Charles kind of basically living here now because of what happened with Hurricane Laura about 2 months ago.
A lot of people displaced because their homes are damaged. Massive infrastructure, hits there where they don't have power. Running water was a huge issue. Paul, appreciate that. Gorgeous sunset tonight there in New Orleans. You wouldn't think anything's coming, right? But we know that something far worse is on the way. We're waiting for the new advisory from the Hurricane Center. Expect that to come in any minute now. But the most recent advisory at the 4 o'clock Central Time was 85 mile per hour category 1. Although I think we're getting some more organization around the center now. Our flight level winds at 80 knots here with the most recent pass from the hurricane hunters. And so that's a small sign here that we are getting some intensification. Northwest movement here at 17 miles per hour. And now we're going to move away from land, right? And that's going to allow us to be in a lower friction environment, warm sea surface temperatures, low wind shear environment, all these things favorable for another re-intensification cycle here. So as we follow the center track of this storm, likely to come into Louisiana, category 2 or category 3 hurricane cannot be ruled out here. But overall, the trajectory of this takes it off to the north and eventually off to the northeast. But there are the hurricane hunters from the Air Force flying into it right now. And again, I think on the northeast side, they're going to slice through this thing, go down to the southeast side. I actually think here on the northwest side is where they might find some of the strongest winds. So I don't think they're really going to change the wind speed all that much from what it is right now, but I would anticipate wind speeds to pick up overnight tonight. Could be a change at the 11 o'clock advisory tonight, but you can see they're now getting wind speeds on each side of the eye. This is the eye down here that they flew through. That's why you had the big drop off in wind speed. But northeast quadrant, southwest quadrant right there. Southwest quadrant was actually higher wind speed than the northeast quadrant. And we're also fighting off, by the way, the dry air that's well displaced from where the hurricane is. So at this point, Alex, I think we're off to the races. Do we go back to 145 and rapidly intensify like we did yesterday? I don't think we quite go that far, but not ruling out going back to a Category 3 for sure.
Absolutely. So prepare for the worst, hope for the best has been the motto this season. You know, in some cases things have worked out, but of course we've already been up against some storms that have done a lot of damage. Now, rainfall potential with this one maybe a little bit more positive than, say, what we've seen with past storms like Sally that just moved a little bit more slowly, brought a lot of rain. With that said, still the possibility of flash flooding. Tomorrow and into early Friday, looking at much of Louisiana, southern sections of Mississippi, and portions of Alabama and West Florida as well. Thursday, or rather Friday into early Saturday, now we've got to watch southwest Louisiana in particular. That's where we think got a good shot of seeing some flash flooding issues possible all the way up into parts of Mississippi and Arkansas. European model has that heaviest footprint from Alexandria to Lake Charles, 8 to 12 inches possible there. We look at the U.S. GFS, again, 8 to 12 inches roughly from Alexandria to Lake Charles, so fairly good agreement. Even the GFS painting in a few isolated spots where we could see over a foot, with then a heavy rainfall footprint of up to 3 to 5 inches extending closer to the Memphis area. So, Mike, flash flooding, maybe not the biggest threat on the table with this one, but absolutely a threat.
100%. Alex, thank you for that. Still to come here in the next hour of Weather Underground, breaking down the future track of Hurricane Delta and where the latest models are zeroing in on a landfall. You know, Louisiana, we're looking squarely at you. Plus, what the hurricane hunters are finding right now as they fly through Delta. Their mission's critical to observing the hurricane. We're back after this.
Well, next on Weather Underground, Hurricane Delta now in the Gulf of Mexico, closing in on the U.S. coast. Hurricane and storm surge watches issued for portions of the Texas and Louisiana coastlines, including many of the same areas ravaged by Hurricane Laura in late August. We've got live team coverage along the coast.
And Delta battering Mexico's Yucatan Peninsula overnight. The storm making landfall, winds with 105 miles an hour. Knocked out power, slammed the resort areas of Cancun and Cozumel with dangerous storm surge. And then tonight, hurricane hunter missions are ongoing. As this hurricane threatens to intensify once again, we have in-depth analysis of the future track in every scenario for landfall and beyond. It's all right now in the special extended edition of Weather Underground. And thanks for being with us. We'll be with you till 9 o'clock tonight. Coverage through the night. I'm Mike Bettis.
I'm Alex Wilson. Yeah, we are covering every angle of Hurricane Delta. We're going to get you ready for the storm, timing, amounts, wind gusts. If you've got questions, though, send them to us. Use the hashtag Hurricane Questions on Twitter. We'll be answering those throughout the show.
All right, we're still awaiting the 7 o'clock Central Time advisory from the Hurricane Center. I think they're waiting right up until the last minute to get some more data from the hurricane hunters that are in there right now. But we're going to show you the track here, which pushes it off to the north and west here over the next day, taking a turn to the north and eventually a turn to the northeast, and looks like a potential landfall in Louisiana. But by tomorrow, we could be right back to a 100-mile-per-hour hurricane. We currently sit at 85, a Category 1 hurricane. So that's a look at the future track. There are a look at the hurricane watches that are in effect. Eventually, these will be upgraded to warnings. Likely that'll happen tomorrow morning. But hurricane watches extend right over into Texas as well. That'll include the Beaumont, Port Arthur area. But you can see that now we're starting to get another little blow up of convection or thunderstorm activity near the center here. And the hurricane hunters are trying to make passes through this. And I see a little bit of blow up right in there. Look at that. And so nighttime or nocturnal convection oftentimes is what you see, and storms can intensify overnight. Been fighting off dry air on the west side and on the east side. And so that's not a hindrance whatsoever at this point. We're getting away from the friction and interaction with land. We're still going over warm sea surface temperatures. We're now working our way into a very low wind shear environment. So all of those things work in favor of intensification. All right, so here's what the hurricane hunters have found so far. This little blip right here, and this is the wind speeds on the left side of your screen. This little blip right here is in the northeast quadrant when the plane flew right through there. Then it went through the eye down here. Then it went through the southwest portion of the thunderstorm down on this side. So that was its latest observation. And then they send data in packets. So likely we'll get some data here in the next 5 to 10 minutes. This is why you see the flat line there. But I think what they're looking for is what's happening there on the northwest side. And we do now have that new advisory. I don't know if I actually have the graphic to show you or not. I don't know if it's updated or not. Let me see if it is right there. 90 mile per hour hurricane force. So it did tick it up just a little bit. Winds were 85, went up to 90. Northwest movement is still the same, and pressure's dropped a couple of millibars here. Was 977. It's now at 973. So again, I think the likely scenario to happen overnight tonight, and now maybe all the way up through landfall even, is intensification, because we've got everything working for us at this point. So I don't think there's any hindrance at this point for this thing to do anything but intensify. Was talking about the warm sea surface temperatures. Now we had 90-degree water temperatures down here in the Caribbean when this thing rapidly intensified up to 145 miles per hour. The sea surface temperatures aren't as warm in the Gulf of Mexico, but still plenty warm, all right? And ocean heat content, maybe not as much as there was in the Caribbean, but still plenty, all right? So there's nothing really to slow it down as far as becoming an intense hurricane once again. So everything is working for it. The wind shear way up here to the north and west of it, light winds aloft, so this thing is going to take off here. You might encounter a little bit of wind shear closer to landfall, but overall, Alex, what we're seeing in the atmosphere, what we're seeing at the surface means an intensifying hurricane. We could go right back to a major hurricane, a Category 3 or higher, at this time tomorrow.
Yes, absolutely in the realm of possibility, which is why it's so important to prepare. Well, here's what we know at this hour. States of emergency have been declared in Mississippi, Alabama, and Louisiana. In Louisiana, mandatory evacuations, they're in place in Calcasieu, Cameron, and Vermilion parishes. Cameron Parish was hit hard by Hurricane Laura. Now officials want work trailers to be moved, tarps to be secured, and homeowners to document repairs that they made up to this point. And the president was briefed today on Hurricane Delta, as asking Gulf Coast residents to pay close attention to what their local and state officials are asking them to do. It's been a tough year for Louisiana. Meteorologist Paul Goodloe is in New Orleans, a city that's found itself in quite a few forecast cones. But yeah, really tough go for some of these communities that were hit so hard by Laura. They're saying, all right, let us know what you've done to repair up to this point, in fear that it could be damaged again.
Yeah, it's everyone on edge, whether you were in Southwest Louisiana or even here in New Orleans here, because you have all types of hazards. One, yes, we're still trying to recover from Laura. People who are have no home to go to are now temporarily living here in New Orleans. Can't wait to get back to Southwest Louisiana once they can physically have a safe place to live. But then here in New Orleans itself, the elevation between, say, 6.5 and 20 feet below sea level, so which makes this city vulnerable to even a summer thunderstorm, let alone a tropical storm or a hurricane in the area. And they do have the ongoing concern with flooding here. In fact, today they're handing out sand. I wouldn't say sandbags, but most places have plenty of sand and some sandbags, but you got to bring your own shovel for a lot of the piles around the city here. For people who know that they can easily flood, maybe with a wind, the east wind that will be coming in strong and hard for the next 48 hours. Some water from even Lake Pontchartrain on the north side of the city could cause some flooding around here as well. But the pumps here that keep New Orleans dry, usually dry, they only can handle 1 inch of rainfall in the first hour. They can pump that out. Then every hour after that, we're talking a ½ inch of rain. That's it. If you get more than a ½ inch of rain after that first inch of rain, the water starts to fill up. Like I mentioned, we're between 6 and 20 feet below sea level. So it's basically a bathtub with the Mississippi River and Lake Pontchartrain, not to mention the Gulf of Mexico well to the south as well. So it's an ongoing concern when you have weather threatened here. We're under a tropical storm watch. The good news is we're not under a hurricane watch. We think the center and the strongest winds with Delta will be far enough west of here where we won't have that ongoing threat of a hurricane or a major hurricane coming over the city. But even with that said, we're going to have tropical storm force wind gusts. So I think wind will be the major player here in terms of creating damage and power outages as we head through probably the middle of the weekend as well. So be prepared to have some impacts. This is not going to be the previous 5 nearby misses here, which won't have hardly any impact. We will have definitely impact here in New Orleans from Hurricane Delta. Mike?
You know, I think is how 2020 has gone for a lot of folks, Paul. You know, maybe 2020 was a good thing for New Orleans, but we have managed to dodge every single one that has come our way, surprisingly. Paul, thank you for that very much. I want to show you how this system is going to be steered, why we're pretty confident in where it's headed and into Louisiana. A dome of high pressure sits here. This is Bermuda High, and that's been responsible for the push to the west over the last 24 hours or so. But that high pressure might back down just a little bit, move a little bit more to the east. That'll allow more of an avenue off to the and once it gets into the middle of the Gulf of Mexico, it's, excuse me, likely then to pull almost due north, okay? But then we're going to get stuck in this jet stream flow. So we've got this big trough that now pulls in. Instead of going right into it, ramming right into it, that just doesn't happen that way. The atmosphere flows. It's a fluid, right? And so it kind of catches a ride on that jet stream. So all in all, you're going to get a motion like this in essence, and that's exactly what the forecast models are doing. It's what the cone does. And the most reliable model so far this year has actually been the GFS. It's actually outperformed the European model in numerous storms this year. The center track goes right down the forecast cone here. So even the Hurricane Center is saying, we like it. We like what it's doing. We like what it's saying. And we're confident in it. And all the GFS ensemble models, every model that they run, all within the forecast cone at landfall. That's pretty remarkable stuff there, folks. And so you look at even the other models, a lot of agreement here. Rarely do you get models in this much of agreement this far out. It's not that far out. It's about 2 days out, but still, you still have a couple of models that stray outside of that, but for the most part, they're all saying Louisiana is the spot, and it's stayed very consistent that way. So we feel confident in that forecast track. As far as the intensity goes, this could vary a little bit here. Friday morning could be a Category 3 hurricane with some forecasted weakening on Friday. Again, take that with a grain of salt, folks. It may happen, it may not. What I plan on right now is a high-end Category 2 or a low to mid-grade Category 3 at landfall, Alex, and just the another one, a long line of storms that have hit us this year. This will make the 4th hit in Louisiana this season.
Yeah, gosh, at this point, they're like, after this better be done. And you understand, Grand Isle, Louisiana, they have been preparing the levees with sandbags. So, you know, they set up the stations where you can go get sandbags for your home, and then they've got the industrial-sized ones where they got to bring out the machinery to carry them, right? Surge will be a real threat here with this storm. Once again, portions of the Gulf Coast could be looking at a dangerous and life-threatening storm surge. Storm surge watches have been posted from extreme eastern parts of Texas all the way over into the state of Alabama. So the entire Louisiana coastline, all of Mississippi under that storm surge watch. And when we look at the potential, now not everyone in, say, this 7 to 11 foot zone will get a surge of 7 to 11 feet, but everyone has the possibility to get that. So again, looking at dangerous, life-threatening surge conditions, thanks to that shallow shelf along the Gulf of Mexico, that helps to increase the danger of a storm surge. And also, the fact that we think we're going to be dealing with a larger storm over the last, 48 hours. It's been a fairly small storm. We anticipate this is going to increase in size. And when you get a stronger storm, you oftentimes get a stronger surge because the larger storm will bring wind pushing on a larger area of the ocean. It will also mean that the stronger wind is going to affect an area over a longer period of time. You got a small storm moving, a large storm moving, though. Some of those same areas will be up against winds for a longer period of time. So with surge being once again a possibility and a very, very dangerous one, find out right now if you're in an evacuation zone. Decide where you'll go. Consider special needs you have. Do you have medical equipment? Do you have pets that you'll need to bring along with you, and make sure the shelter you choose can accommodate that. If you are in a safe spot, call a friend who might live along the coast. Say, hey, come stay with me, and evacuate right away when you're told to do so, Mike.
Things that we need to be thinking about every single time a hurricane threatens. When exactly do the conditions go downhill for you? For many of you, that's just all you really want to know, right? We think that by Friday morning, tropical storm force winds are hitting us here in southern Louisiana and coastal Texas as well. Through the day, those winds will ramp up as you go farther north, but around the core of the center, which is likely to be somewhere near Cameron, near Pecan Island here, you could get the most intense winds that could gust over 100 miles an hour. As far as the tropical storm force winds with the current system, it's not a huge system, all right? So the tropical storm force winds, that's winds of 39 miles per hour up to 73 miles an hour, are within a 125 miles from the center. Now, the hurricane force winds are in a really small disk, if you will, near the core, but the storm itself is expected to grow. Its wind field to expand here and intensify up to landfall here. So a little bit larger wind field for hurricane winds, although that still stays relatively compact. But now the tropical storm force winds that extend at 160 miles from the center. So we could get tropical storm force winds in Galveston or Houston, could get those in Baton Rouge and in New Orleans, even though we're not in New Orleans, we're not in the cone. But we can still see very gusty winds there. There's where a potential landfall could be, maybe somewhere near Cameron, Louisiana. Winds go beyond that cone. They go farther inland from the landfall location. We would not be surprised to see, tropical storm, even hurricane force gusts in Alexandria. You could see a tropical storm force gust in Little Rock or Memphis or even a Tupelo. In all these places, you could have some tree damage and potentially some sporadic power outages as well. Winds tonight are light. They increase tomorrow. I'd call it a breezy day tomorrow. And then winds really ramp up as we go into Friday as the hurricane makes landfall. At landfall location, winds could gust over 100, but New Orleans, winds could gust 50, maybe even more on landfall day on Friday, Alex.
Yeah, and then there's the rainfall threat. That's one that's going to extend well inland. Portions of Louisiana could be looking at 8 to 12 inches. So one positive with this storm is we don't think we're going to be measuring rainfall in feet like we have with some of the storms earlier this year. It'll be a progressive storm, but still could bring enough rain to trigger flash flooding. We look at the GFS, very similar in its placement of those 8 to 12 inch totals. And there, the possibility that maybe around Lake Charles or really off to the southwest, we could even see some isolated totals higher than that. Portions of western Mississippi, southeastern Arkansas also seeing a decent rainfall footprint. Rain begins to move in tomorrow afternoon, so we're going to see conditions deteriorate through the PM hours on Thursday, expecting landfall to come on Friday, so torrential downpours possible along with the wind, and that heavy rain continues into early Saturday morning. You can still see some of that heavy rain across Louisiana into the state of Arkansas. Moving into the afternoon, still some downpours into parts of West Tennessee, western Kentucky. But again, the movement is a good thing, Mike. We're not going to be looking at areas just sitting under a storm for days and the rainfall piling up in feet.
Yeah, like we've seen so many other times this season. Alex, thanks for that. Also tracking severe storms that raked across the Northeast. About 500,000 customers without power as of right now. And how about the winds that knock trees onto power lines, arcing those power lines? There are the sparks. Many people in the dark right now. Winds have gusted 60 to 70 miles per hour. Could very well have been a very sneaky derecho that hit us over the course of the last several hours in the Northeast. Stick with us. More on these storms in the Northeast, more on intensifying Hurricane Delta after this.
Well, this is real.
When your cameras roll, our experts react.
Jaw-dropping.
Weather Gone Viral, Sunday nights at 9, here on the Weather Channel. Hurricane season doesn't stop for a pandemic, and neither do we.
From this point forward, conditions will continue to deteriorate.
Don't let COVID-19 take your eye off the tropics. This year's threat is more complex and dangerous than ever before.
Remain vigilant, pay close attention to the Weather Channel.
No one can cover this historic hurricane season better than the Weather Channel. Get the information you need to stay safe every day. Storm safety in a pandemic, all season long, right here on the Weather Channel.
Welcome back to Weather Underground. I'm meteorologist Paul Griffith live in New Orleans, Louisiana. The sun is set here, but as the sun comes up tomorrow, our hours are running out for preparation. And once again, we're dealing with another potentially landfalling situation right here in the state of Louisiana for it seems like the umpteenth time. You take a look at this graphic. It shows you that so far 6 times this hurricane season, including just a couple of days ago, the city of New Orleans has been in that forecast cone at some point during the lifespan of these various other tropical systems that were coming through. In fact, we were here in the cone literally hours ago in New Orleans because of Hurricane Delta. Good news is we're no longer in that cone. So that's good. But the bad news is we're still under something else we've been in 5 times.